Welcome back to another Spilldrop tutorial. Today, I'm going to show you how to build the Mini Spillbox base. This is a solo duo base design that I came up with for the wipe with Capron. If you haven't seen his video, go check it out, linked in the top corner here, and show him some love. We had a legendary wipe, and despite that base getting griefed repeatedly, no one even dared to raid it for the entire week. So if you're looking for a base that can stand the test of time and is incredibly functional, then this is the base for you. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump straight into this build, and I'll throw some narration over the top just to make things a little more clear. Let's get into it. Alright, for starters, you're going to want to get your primary foundations laid out. Like I said, initially this is just a basic 2x2 footprint with some slight modifications. You're going to want to include the honeycomb on the outside, which is just 3 triangles off of either side of the squares, and 2 of these foundations are going to be lowered. There's going to be 2 higher foundations where the outer core hallway is going to be, and then there's going to be a lowered foundation for the tool cupboard. And eventually you'll remove the other lowered foundation where the refinery will be kept right next to your TC room. I recommend getting all of this sealed off as early as you can. It's likely still going to be very readable from the outside for anybody who gets an early look at your base while it's being built. However, it will be pretty secure once you've got some doors on here and you've sealed off the initial tool cupboard room and the hallway in front of it. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is that on either side of the front door, the honeycomb on the left side and the right side of the front door, you're going to want to make sure that the outermost foundations are raised that way. When we get to the shield wall, you can still place the roofs attached to the low foundations along those triangles without having them clip to the foundations that are built into the honeycomb. It can help to seal off the honeycomb as you go here. That way you can also upgrade things as necessary. If there are parts of the honeycomb that you know you will not be able to reach once they are sealed in, I recommend upgrading them to at least sheet metal while you have the chance to access them, because once they are sealed in, certain aspects of this design will be impossible to reach beyond that point. So you'll see me upgrading some walls and some roofs to sheet metal just because I know they will be very tough to reach once I get past the stone building material stage.
This windmill I consider one of my favorite super modules of this design, and while it's not a traditional super module in the sense that it is saving any space or providing any extreme utility beyond its traditional construction, what's cool about this windmill is that you can build it at full height as soon as you get the starter built. So you can build all the way up 6 frames high from the 2-story roof, get your windmill up there, connect it to your battery all the way down in your core without any additional combiners or electrical components to bridge that distance. It's like a perfect stretch all the way down to the core, and once it's set up, you don't have to make any changes to the windmill later on. It's fully complete and fully integrated into the final design. I recommend getting your loot storage rooms set up as early as you can while you're building this base, because there's not a ton of storage early on. Most of the work that goes into building this base is in getting the actual build put together. And once you get that complete, then the storage fills in afterwards. So getting storage here and there where you can is definitely a good idea as early on as possible. Jump in here and show you something that is kind of important for builds like this. So one thing you need to keep in mind is that the snapping tool is awesome, right? It gives you the ability to snap stuff really quickly and easily and get pretty clean placements, but it's not always going to be the best placements for the items that you got. So one thing I've noticed is that even without swapping between the hard side and the soft side textures on these walls, which for stone specifically gives you quite a lot of extra room for placement against that hard side stone wall texture. One thing that you'll notice about the snapping tool is that it doesn't snap quite as close as most deployables can actually get. What we're seeing here is with the barrel being snapped, but you'll notice that if we wiggle it into here, that's even closer than the snapping tool could get it. Watch, as I hit the snap button, it bounces off the wall a little bit there. Usually you can get even closer placements than the snap tool as long as you're just playing around with it a little bit. So make sure you experiment with your placements and don't always rely on that snap tool. It's good, but it's not better than you. Another trick that I'm going to hop in here for is getting these large boxes placed up on top of this ramp, because you really want them to be placed perfectly for this little trick to work. Having the ramp on top of your TC adds just another layer to the raid cost if folks are trying to raid straight down to bypass the bunker and go straight into the TC room. So having this ramp here, while it is soft side from the top of the ramp, provides a little bit of extra cover to shield this floor here. And just generally increases the raid cost. Now, getting boxes placed on this ramp can be a little bit tricky, but I did discover something while I was building this base with Capron. So one trick that you can use is, which if you place the counter deployable right about there or so, you can walk up on top of it and you get a little bit of extra height over the top of this ramp. That allows you to see even further down, and one thing you want to make sure is you're getting the box placed with the correct orientation. So I recommend placing it so that that rectangle you see there is facing to your right. So that's going to have it on the right side. That way you can put any adapters on there that you'd like. Then you want to just try to get it as far down that ramp as you can get it. Using this counter, you should be able to get a little bit of extra height right here in front of the ramp, so you can place your large box down as far back as it possibly can go. That should be perfect. And you can get your small box in here as well, maybe right about there. And then you should be able to get an adapter on the front with no trouble at all. Let's go ahead and loop over here and see. Yep, we can snap an adapter on there too. Let's try the same on this other side and see if we can get them both set up. Can we get the adapter? Sure can. That looks pretty good. You should be able to get that rear adapter on that box as well, but you should be able to do it like that. Go ahead and make sure you pick up all of your counters, and you can break your shelf. If you don't put a small box here, you can climb up, access all of these, and you should be able to reach both of the nodes. Maybe a little bit tricky, and sometimes you need to pull it forward just a smidge. Just right there for a second, we have the industrial in and the industrial out. So in is going to be on the back side. Bring that all the way up here so you can see what we're talking about. Make that one blue, and then the out is going to be right here in the front. Red. So there you have it. You can reach that incredibly far back adapter with no trouble at all and tie it into an industrial system if that's something that you're looking for. There's also room to place another box up here on this shelf and kind of squeeze it in there. I would advise caution if you're going to place this box, and I'll show you why. Because if you're going to put an armored door in this slot, which I recommend doing eventually, and you open the hatch, you'll notice that the only box you can see is that small box that you placed there in the front, and it's very hard to reach any of the other boxes around it. So you don't need that one there, but you should be able to reach some of these boxes through the armored door like you see here. You just kind of got to find that right spot to do it. These smaller boxes you can get just by crouching down and looking up at them. Depending on where they're placed, it can be a little bit easier, but that way you can access those boxes without even opening up the core. And as I just mentioned, you may want to experiment with the triangular floor frame instead of the regular triangular floor to see if that allows you to still seal the bunker while accessing all of the boxes in your TC room. That's your bunker sealed. You'll want to upgrade some of these to armored for the extra defendability. This is a solo or duo based design, so I made sure that in the core behind the bunker there was room for at least 2 beds. You may be able to fit more sleeping bags or the DLC towels down here if you want to get additional teammates in your core, but with the beds, which offer really rapid respawns, you can only fit so many in the design, and I was only able to get 2 while still having all of the other utility in the core that I wanted for this build. And the reason that I alternate going with armored and sheet metal walls in the core here is because it's a little bit of a cost saving measure, and what this does is it forces a raider to commit to a raid path, because they will know that they have to break at least one armored wall to get access to both of these triangles. Many of these initial super modules made their debut in my super modules video for the starter design for this base. So if you haven't seen that video yet, go check it out. I show you a little bit more about how these modules come together in kind of a more digestible sense and what's included in this build. But I just wanted to show you more or less how these come together when you're just building them out at a regular pace. Obviously, I sped everything up, so if you need to, you can slow that down and it should help clarify things. And that's a pretty quick and dirty way to get your furnaces set up. I recommend using these triangular floor frames when you can, so it makes navigation up and down for these shelves much easier than trying to use a regular triangular floor. So that's just a little pro tip from me to you. This is my standard barrel shelf super module. To get everything to fit, I like to get my first barrel as deep into the back corner as possible, and then snap my second vertical barrel into this other corner here to the right. Then you can place your two horizontal barrels very easily, and they all tuck really neatly behind the garage door. A very easy way to make sure that you can access all 8 barrels in this loot room with no trouble at all. A trick I use to get your triangular planter box as far into this corner as you can, save you a little bit of extra room, is to hold down the shift key and rotate it until you can get it to place sort of freehand style like this. Now, oddly enough, holding the shift key down for the planter box disables the snapping tool, which is automatic for it. That's probably about as good as I can do. Go ahead and get your shelves in. Another tool to give you a little bit of extra height while you're doing stuff like this is the siren light. And that lets you walk up and get a little bit more height while you're making these placements. This design also calls for a water pump. You can have this placed really anywhere that's convenient for you. I recommend tucking it either higher up on this wall perhaps, or even all the way down in your core where it's convenient to access. But try not to place anything within this half-high square here, because anything in this space may obstruct the bunker, and you don't really want that happening while you're trying to seal up your base at the end of the day. And then obviously you'll want to connect your water source to the pump, and then the pump to this sprinkler. When I'm designing a super module, I try to strike a balance between both the density of the items in that super module and the mobility of the space around it. If a super module is incredibly densely packed, but you can't get into it and use it, then it doesn't really matter how much storage is crammed in there. It's not going to be useful, and it's going to be a space that causes issues for you. So I try to strike that balance where you have the maximum amount of storage or utility while also still being a space that you can navigate around. That can be a difficult balance, but I recommend experimenting with adding or removing small boxes, batteries, or electrical components to increase the mobility of the space. Now, the one thing you really want to do once you've got your mixing table placed here is to make sure that your bunker can still close. So to do that, you're just going to want to go ahead and get your bunker down, even in twig, to make sure that it won't be blocked. All right, perfect. Looks like it works just fine. This is another super module that is near and dear to my heart. It is a sunken charcoal generator furnace module. In our wipe, Capron farmed a ton of wood and kept it in those boxes up on those floating shelves. We would go in and refill the furnaces whenever they had burned through a stack of wood, and we had a basically endless supply of charcoal throughout the wipe. That's something that you can automate further if you like, or you can leave it a very manual system like we had, and it still works just fine. The shelf that I put in here over the front door is something that I recommend getting in relatively early in the build. Capron and I noticed it was pretty tedious and annoying to be going up this jump up and through all these doors to get down into the core to deposit or any materials that we farmed, and it's much easier to deposit it at a box near the outside so that it rapidly transfers into your loot rooms. And that is the starter for this base, fully built and just about fully upgraded. This is obviously a bit more expensive than most starter bases, but rather than having to come all the way back down and upgrade everything, I figured I'd just show you what the eventual cost would look like for the core and the first 2 levels. Here's what the upkeep is looking like already. That HQM is kind of expensive, but as you can see, everything else is not too bad. So for the additional raid defendability that this HQM provides, that's sort of a small price to pay. Now for the outer shield wall. As we go along, placing these low foundations, you'll notice that I place some squares. I'm going to delete these squares as we come back through here because they're simply to get the placement for this outer triangle. I try to keep this design as cost efficient as possible, so getting rid of these extra squares helps keep the upkeep costs for the shield wall as low as possible while still fully sealing in the design and giving you the security that you're looking for. As a raid defense measure, around the outside of the shield wall, I've included 2 of these small sleeper pods where you can place a sleeping bag and a small box or a weapon rack of some kind. These allow you to respawn at the foot of the base within the shield wall in case that's a good angle for a raid defense. I've also added the option for some locker pods within the outer wall as well, but I didn't include the furnace in this module because I wanted to keep it relatively straightforward. In a raid defense, having too many things in your way can cost you precious seconds. When I mentioned earlier that I left high foundations around the outside of the honeycomb, it was so that I could add these peaks. You can snap these triangular roofs to the low foundation rather than to the high foundation, which allows you to place them and give you this angle through the windows that I've set up here. If you have a low foundation at the end of your honeycomb, that wall will block the snapping for the triangular roof and it won't let you place those the way that you'd like. For these roofs, I recommend playing around with the different skins to get the effect that you're looking for. I think the Brutalist skin is pretty cool and it gives you some really interesting angles. The Stone skin gives you some pretty wicked coverage for those wizard peaks down there. You'll see from slightly above the roof, you can't see anything underneath the shingles that are coming down, but then once you get down to within shooting range, that's when you can kind of see up pretty easily. Feel free to alternate your roof textures to see which ones work best for you, or if you like one in particular, you can pretty much stick with that one. I recommend adding ladders here on the wizard peak downs because these allow you to climb up into the rafters. You can kind of crawl around and peek through the gaps there, and it's definitely an unexpected place to find someone shooting at you from. In our full adventure, Capron did bring home an elevator, which we incorporated into the final design for the base. However, that did cost a couple of super module components for the final design, and I wanted to show you what I had planned for this build initially. So if you want to see how we incorporated an elevator into our base design, go check out his video because it worked great and it was definitely a very fun and quirky addition. For this floor, I really encourage you to freestyle a little bit, use elements that you're comfortable with, or experiment with new things that you haven't tried. None of this is set in stone, and it seems like every time I rebuild this floor, I have a different take on the modules that I incorporated here. However, I did want to show you this cool Resupply pallet module that I created with 6 of these vertical barrels, 4 large boxes, and 2 small boxes to give you some options for storage, displaying your different box skins, and a number of storage adapters so that you can add more automation to your base and incorporate a little bit more of a storage focused module on this floor. This floor also contains another set of beds, so you've got a middle tier respawn point in your base, as well as a number of peak downs that offer various amounts of access to the outside base and your shield wall. One of my greatest inventions, the frog peak. Got a relatively chill peak here. Jump up on top of the frog. You've got this pretty awesome peak that smushes you down, so you're forced to crouch because you're being pushed under the door frame. You can take one step back, and then you've got this crazy peak looking straight down. And of course, crouching and moving around gives you other slight angles as well. Pretty neat. Good peak. Plus, you can also sit here and you get 100% comfort. This floor also provides some really good locations for a little bit clunky or underused deployables, such as the research table, a repair bench, or even the engineering workbench. For the shooting floor, I went with a very traditional layout using these squares and the single door frames, which prevent you from passing through into the actual shooting floor from the outside. You can bypass these doorways by having somebody push you down from up above into the shooting floor, but since this shooting floor is also fully sealed, that will only get you into the outer area. If you keep the primary double doors for your shooting floor closed, then even if somebody is able to get into where your windows and peek downs are, they will not be able to get further in to where your beds, mixing tables, or other deployables may be. You may think that it's a little bit unusual to upgrade the wall frames on the top floor of the base to sheet metal, but my reason for doing so is that the MLRS strikes tend to have a pretty significant splash impact. So if they break the floor tiles over those frames, which are traditionally stone or sheet metal, then the idea is that they will not be able to fully break the metal frames on the inside. That should preserve a little bit of the structural integrity for the roof, preventing any additional roof tiles from losing stability and falling off the structure. Also, they do use up a little bit less of the tool cupboard space for upkeep if you upgrade them to metal as compared to stone. For the top-down defense turret pods, I first set up the turret pod itself by building up 2 frames, adding the floor frame and the platform for the turret, and then enclosing it entirely in a half-high shell. Then I expanded the tower up to the same height as the primary wind turbine, because you can also add wind turbines to your top-down defense turret pods for a little bit of extra power generation and security to protect those turret pods from an MLRS strike. The windmills will absorb a couple of those explosions and possibly protect a little bit more of your roof. The final additions to this base design are some beds for a rooftop respawn point, as well as some mixing tables and a computer station, so that way you have the ability to set up drones or cameras to surveil the outside of your base. You can mix and craft meds, ammo, or explosives using the mixing tables all around this floor, and you can incorporate any other deployables that you see fit to add to this space to make it a little bit more useful to you. I'm going to cheat a little bit here and fly around to get these barricades placed. It's been about an hour and a half since I started this recording, so I'm mostly just trying to go eat some dinner. This is just showing you that you can get these barricades placed without too much overhang, and they'll block up the top of these triangles really nicely for you. We're looking at the full upkeep for this base, and that's with all the doors, and obviously you can make some tweaks here and there. Without the bunker in place, this is what a full TC worth of upkeep is looking like. 23 hours and 41 minutes, almost 24 hours on the dot, and there are probably some places where you can upgrade stone to metal to get an even better ratio in order to get that perfect 24-hour upkeep window. And that is it. The fully built mini Spillbox. Those turrets that we put up on the roof really do protect your base from anybody climbing on top of it or trying to raid from the top down. We had this base up for 5 full days on Rustoria Main with a mini heli sitting on the roof and a full kit sleeper up there as well, and nobody made it anywhere close to the rooftop. If you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel so you can see more builds and super module videos in the future. If you're on YouTube mobile, consider hitting that hype button down by the description. That will boost this video in the algorithm to help the channel grow so more people can see these super module videos and base builds. Huge thanks again to Capron for bringing me along on his adventure to create the ultimate optimized base. This is what we came up with, and I'm incredibly proud of how it turned out. If you like this video, leave a like down below. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comments section. This has been your friend Spilldrop, and I will catch you in the next video.